My name's Michael Manty. I'm the chairperson of today's meeting of the Wingecarribee Local Planning Panel. The other panel members are today on my far right, Larissa Ozog, on my immediate right, Heather Warnton, and on my left, Tony Neal. I'd like to open the meeting by acknowledging the Gundungurra and Tharawal people as the traditional custodians of this land we now call the Wingecarribee Shire. I pay my respect to elders both past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today. There are 6 items on today's agenda. The first 3 items relate to planning proposal / rezoning matters. The panel's role in respect to those matters is to provide advice to the council about how those matters should proceed. It's not our role to make any decisions or determinations in relation to the planning proposals or other strategic planning issues on the agenda. The ultimate decision will be made by the council or the administrator as it is now at the moment. The other 3 items, which are development applications, the panel's role is to make a determination in relation to those items. The panel will either refuse, approve or, in exceptional circumstances, defer consideration of those applications. The panel's minutes and determination will be published on the council's website within 24 hours, I think it is, 24 hours of today's meeting. And the notices of determination will be issued by council officers in due course after that date. Before I call the first item, I have to ask other panel members to declare any conflicts of interest.
No conflicts of interest from me, Larissa.
I have no conflicts either. Thank you.
No conflict of interest for me.
And no conflict of interest from me. The first item, before I call the first item, there are some rules about presentation to the panel. That is, speakers are limited to 4 minutes each. The panel will consider extending that time if necessary. If only one person could speak at a time, please, and confine your presentation to the panel to what you consider essential to let the panel know about. The first item on the agenda is consideration of a scoping study for review of zoning at Wattle Street, Colo Vale. The council officer's recommendation is to not proceed with the scoping study. I have 3 people listed on my agenda to address the panel. I understand Mr. Pascoe is going to go first. Mr. Pascoe, does he go up to the mic over there? If you can just go to the mic, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to confirm initially that I'll be the only planner speaking in terms of this project today. I'm representing Michael Brown of Michael Brown Planning Strategies. Michael will not be addressing the panel. And under such circumstances, my presentation will probably go for about 5 minutes, and I would seek the panel's indulgence with that extra minute if we get into that space. At the end of our presentations, Mr. Magro will be representing the ownership group, the Wattle Street Colo Vale ownership group, and he'll have copies of both our presentations to hand up should you wish to refer to them later on in your deliberations. So under those circumstances, if it's okay to commence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, council staff, thank you for the opportunity to present in part the response to the Wattle Street comprehensive council panel briefing report that's detailed at item 5.1. Mr Magro, as I mentioned, is a representative of the ownership group, and other members of the ownership group are present today, and he'll present and reinforce the position of the group having regard to the process to date and the recommendation before you. The briefing report before you leaves no doubt that the current complement of relevant planning staff believe the proposal as documented to date demonstrates neither strategic nor site-specific merit. This view would appear to be a reflection in part of council staff's recommendation in respect of the subject site previously. You'll be aware and familiar in the council briefing report that the Independent Advisory Assessment Panel on 1 July 2021 nominated that the site be included in respect of a candidate site. The council staff saw differently at that point in time, and council staff were focused on the appropriateness of the Wensleydale site being less constrained and a more appropriate expansion of the village. The subject view was not supported, as I've alluded to, by the Independent Advisory Assessment Panel of the day, who recommended that it be considered as a future infill opportunity for Colo Vale, noting that the site had merit for further investigation as an infill site in accordance with priority 1 of the housing strategy, given its location close to existing residential development and the school. Such recommendation was endorsed at the council ordinary meeting of the 14th of July 2021. Buoyed by the comments from the independent panel, the ownership group and planning consultant representatives met with council staff and formed a clear view that the proposal could only be advanced by submitting an appropriately documented scoping proposal as a segue to inclusion as an addendum to the local housing strategy. We believe that the scoping proposal that's been submitted to council to be strategically aligned with known future aspirations for the village and the New South Wales Government's housing mandate, and was sufficiently rigorous, being informed by some reasonably comprehensive early background studies, acknowledging that more detail would ultimately accompany a planning proposal compiled after acceptance on the local housing strategy. It's unclear whether the panel have had access to those detailed studies, because the attachment 1 in the panel briefing paper appears to include Mr Brown's scoping proposal and the title sheets to each of those annexures or specialist reports. So we're not sure whether the panel's had access to the detail of those specialist reports. In respect of the specialist review comments that are noted in the briefing report, it is noted that the accompanying bushfire hazard assessment in referral to the RFS led to a request for a strategic bushfire assessment. Such additional assessment was undertaken and subsequently supported in principle by the RFS, subject to 3 areas that required that were identified for further investigation. They being the potential adequacy of building envelopes once APZs were applied on 3 lots, a small dead-end cul-de-sac in the northeast, and the categorisation of vegetation to the west, in part as grassland. These matters, we believe, are all addressable and could be the focus of future, more detailed investigations. The ecological comments by the former Biodiversity and Conservation Division of the former Department of Planning and Environment highlight local high environmental value lands and biodiversity corridors in the vicinity. Indeed, they are the principal corridors and remnants they're alluding to or referring to are noted to be off-site. The implications of vegetation removal for bushfire management are linked to potential offsetting strategy and would be reviewed. The comment of... Sorry, Mr Chair, I've probably got another 2 minutes.
Happy for you to continue.
Thank you. The comment of speculative future rezoning is a matter for council management within its comprehensive policy framework. Amenity and character issues would be central to a future landscape master plan and possible review of the submitted urban design master plan and inherent community engagement. The Wensleydale model is interestingly questioned, and increased focus on the existing village potential densification is suggested by that group. A comprehensive stormwater management strategy can be implemented based upon the principles of water-sensitive urban design, appropriately managed discharges to council's road drainage network, and relevant easements to accepted natural systems can be achieved. The message communicated in the council report is the first instance that the concept of a scoping report proposal was advanced, that council has articulated in detail concerns with the proposal. The concerns that have been raised have not been communicated in detail previously. The council's briefing report clearly advances that a more nuanced, place-based, community-inspired outcome holds the key to Colo Vale's consolidation and expansion as a village. Council's favoured parachuting of a master plan self-contained Wensleydale new suburb on the perimeter of the village may not reflect a community-inspired vision. Indeed, sensitive infill and transitionary development leveraging off the village proper would appear to represent a more acceptable community outcome. A review of the Wattle Street master plan that is less reliant on an ecological offset strategy and provides a more balanced ecological conservation and bushfire management strategy would appear to be in order and readily achievable, though at some modest cost in terms of the yield that's currently promoted in the scheme before you. It is acknowledged that any revised proposal would be required to be adequately serviced with appropriate infrastructure, including reticulated water and sewer, and the latter in this regard is not likely to be available for 4 years, as communicated in Council's other forward planning and budgetary documents. As the panel and Council clearly understand, urban development and its servicing has significant lead times, which must be accommodated by both long-term and short-term planning, decision-making, and ultimately delivery. And in this regard, decision-making cannot become an elongated serial process. Indeed, planning and budgetary provision have been committed to the amplification of the Mittagong sewage treatment plant. Identification as a candidate site on the local housing strategy is a critical step in facilitating the comprehensive investigation and timely delivery of residential land. To this end, the material provided to date is considered adequate to demonstrate urban capability and inclusion as an addendum to the local housing strategy as previously mapped out by Council. The nature and final form of the development can then be confidently refined and advanced in the knowledge of inclusion on such strategy. In conclusion, the recommendation in the briefing report to not support the scoping proposal and not consider the site for inclusion in the Wingecarribee local housing strategy is vigorously challenged for the reasons just communicated. Should the panel, however, not be of a view that the site can currently form an addendum to the local housing strategy, the ownership group would request that the matter be deferred pending submission of a revised community-supported place-based master plan vision as a catalyst for addition as an addendum to the local housing strategy. Thank you. As I mentioned, a copy of this presentation and Mr Magro's presentation will be handed up at the end, and that conclusion will be there for you to digest further if you need to.
Thank you, Mr Pascoe. Before I call Mr Magro, we might just open it up for questions
Yes.
of yourself from the panel members. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned that you're at the very end that if the recommendation, or sorry, if the proposal wasn't supported, the alternative of a master plan. How does that work? What does that exactly mean?
We would go back and look in detail at the independent professional specialist studies that were commissioned. We hear the message from council quite clearly that they are looking for a more nuanced, place-based strategy. We would engage with master planners to look at what that may entail, particularly in terms of less offsetting, in terms of vegetation loss, and looking at the attributes of the site in more detail, potentially moving away from a rigid 1,000 square metre module development to something that had a gradation, having regard to the circumstances of the site from 1,000 square metres to 4,000 square metres, understanding that there'd be some diminution in yield, but it would be something that we believe, if council is focused as they appear to be on the place-based approach and community engagement, that there'd be an opportunity for us to pursue a revised, more nuanced approach to the site.
Just to your site?
And in the same context, Wensleydale doesn't afford those opportunities of village expansion that we're alluding to in this context.
Okay, and reason number one, it's on the screen at the moment, is the lack of strategic approach or strategic merit. How do you see that could be overcome, or what's your response to that fundamental issue that's been raised by the council officers?
In terms of strategic approach, we believe that the Section 9.1 directions that obviously provide the firm foundation for strategy can be satisfactorily addressed. We've mentioned ecology, we've mentioned bushfire management in particular. We also see the issue of integrated land use and transport, that it can be readily addressed in the scheme. The issue of the southeast and southern tablelands regional plan, it's incomplete nature at present. We don't believe is an obstacle because given the government's current mandate to try and facilitate housing supply, we believe that this small opportunity, expanding on an existing village rather than creating a new suburb adjacent to the existing village, strategically addresses the opportunity of providing a module that has regard to leveraging off existing infrastructure. The fact that the Mittagong sewage treatment plant is at capacity. We know that there's commitment strategically to upgrade that plant and budgetary provision to do so. There is a timeline for doing that. So we believe that strategically the infrastructure question mark is one that can be addressed in the fullness of time over at least a 4-year period. So strategically we're looking at investing, if we were included on the housing strategy initially, if we were initially included, investing more resources in terms of addressing the issues that are before you. If the panel's recommendation to council is that it not be included on the housing strategy, well then the owners need to make a decision about that alternative path that we've discussed in passing with them in terms of advancing it. But strategically, we believe that the site ticks the boxes in terms of council's strategies and state government policies and the higher order directions in terms of Section 9.1.
I guess your client's site is competing against Wensleydale for future expansion of Coalowvale.
But in part, Mr Chair, in part we don't see them necessarily as outright competitors. We think they offer two different things. In terms of what's probably likely to be more appealing to the local community and residents, it may very well be the expansion of village as we've promoted. In terms of parachuting in a new Renwick in the paddock, obviously there'd be some demand for a new model of that nature, but they may complement each other.
Is there room for both to go forward?
In terms of the infrastructure capacity, you would have to look very closely at how much capacity is in that Mittagong sewage treatment upgrade. But the impact of the proposal that we're suggesting would be, in our mind, fairly minor. The Wensleydale is a much bigger, a much broader impact potentially in terms of infrastructure provision. But you know, speaking to the ownership group, they see opportunities for both potentially proceeding, not competing, but fulfilling different market niches.
And looked at the level of constraints. Neither site's without constraint. The message that I get out of the council officer's report is that Wensleydale has perhaps lesser constraints and more manageable constraints in terms of vegetation, bushfire management than your client's land. Is that, you want to make a comment about that?
Well, Wensleydale is obviously a larger site that has been extensively cleared for past pastoral activities and probably has less challenges in coming up with a nuanced response to the on-site constraints. The constraints in terms of our client's site, we believe can be worked with. We don't believe that they're showstoppers, because when we look at the comment from the environment group, the external environment group, they're really concerned about the remnants and the corridors off-site. And that's not ignoring the fact that there is vegetation on site. And as I mentioned before, we would try and massage our master plan approach to see how much of that vegetation we could retain without going step one into offsetting, removal and offsetting. But we believe they're manageable. There are examples right across western, southwestern Sydney of similar environments to the one in Wattle Street that we're confronted with, where a balanced planning outcome can be achieved. And the comments that have been expressed previously in terms of the Robertson Village exercise and the way that the Southern Highlands community relate to character and amenity in their villages is something that we're cognizant of, and we believe that an amended master plan approach may be able to potentially address most of those issues that have been raised. That amenity and character are critical considerations in terms of marketing this estate as well, not just developing it.
Do you have any information for the panel about the point made by the council officers about there being no legal stormwater point of discharge? We're
currently still investigating and researching that, but our knowledge is that all of those basins that are proposed will manage stormwater on site and will discharge in every instance except one that we need to check to council's roadside drainage system in a controlled manner, not just dumping stormwater in that roadside reservation and drainage system. But there is one that we need to check in terms of the potential for an easement to the immediate natural corridor system.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr Magro.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
My name is Marty Magro. I represent the ownership group of 6 families with existing allotments of approximately 13 hectares. We've all been in the area for a considerable time, most running local businesses, employing local people. We're a part of the local community. I'd like to thank the panel for their previous support and for the opportunity to speak to you today. In July 2021, we were encouraged by the Independent Advisory Planning Assessment Panel recommendation that our site be further examined as it is a suitable candidate for infill development. This was contrary to council staff recommendation. We then progressed to work with the council and were advised by senior planning staff regarding proposed lot sizes and other details. We were encouraged generally by way of meetings with council staff that outlined a scoping report proposal and a housing strategy advancement pathway. We have also been buoyed by the support of the council administrator in community forums. We have strong disappointment in the last meeting with council just before the new planning management team was constructed. The meeting was in January 2023. The outcomes that were documented were not completely accurate, and this anomaly was never addressed. We are not totally surprised by the recommendations that we have received, as they echo the council staff's original stance. However, we are very disappointed and really surprised that such a negative view is promoted in the face of the information provided and the specialist advice received. There are addressable issues, but the reports are all supportive. We encourage the panel to review all the information provided in the reports in great detail if you haven't already. That's mainly the scoping reports, because I don't think from that paperwork that you guys have got that. We also ask you to accept that service infrastructure can and already has been planned for, with the present 2022 commitment to a $32 million upgrade of the Mittagong Series treatment plant and related infrastructure. And we also ask you to acknowledge the village housing diversity demand by existing residents and new residents alike. The inclusion of our site on the local housing strategy will facilitate a further strategic investment beyond the $250,000 we've already spent. This will allow amplification of the studies as part of a future planning proposal. This would also allow us to refine the master plan to have more focus to the place-based planning principles like those exposed by council in the recommendation report. Appropriate local community engagement will also be part of this process. We are not in opposition to Wensleydale being proposed as an element in the Colo Vale expansion vision, but Wensleydale cannot fulfil the diversity of future Colo Vale housing demands. It also cannot leverage off existing social infrastructure and provide a sense of community in the existing village. The council's recommendation report refers to the success of Renwick. Renwick is a part of Mittagong, but will always be Renwick, not Mittagong. Wensleydale, similar to Renwick, is more like a satellite city and will never be part of the original Colo Vale village. It can never add to the enhancement of the existing village and community. We ask and encourage the panel to scrutinise detail in all the submitted information around the scoping report if you haven't already done so, to seek personal clarification that the council's recommendation report only really reports on the no case and is not in line with the opinion of the independent professional authors of the scoping report. We also ask you to independently establish the appropriateness of including our site as an addendum to the local housing strategy. If this is achieved, it will then give us the opportunity to facilitate the incremental advancement and refinement of the proposal with council, the community and service providers over time. In this process, we can implement more focus on place-based planning as suggested by council's recommendation. In the interim, the planned and budgeted infrastructure, even though it's several years off, will more than likely be in place before we complete this timely process. I'd like to thank the panel once again for the opportunity to reinforce our case.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr Magro from the panel members? No. Okay.
Thank you.
Mr Magro. So I'll now move on to item 2. I'm happy for you guys to leave the meeting unless you want to stick around. The two, sorry? What, a transcript of what you've said? Yes. Okay, yeah, that'll be fine. As long as it's not any information that the council officers haven't seen or heard.
The council officers haven't seen that submission, it's just
But, right,
so it's related.
okay then. Right. Thank you. Um, the panel won't be offended if you leave the meeting, but you're quite happy to stick around if you like. Okay. Right, thank you. Thanks. Okay. Second item on today's agenda is update on independent peer review of draft Wingecarribee Community Heritage Study. The council officer's recommendation is that the panel note the update on the proposed independent peer review of the draft Wingecarribee Heritage Study and note the proposed timeline for public exhibition and peer review draft study. Have no people listed to address the panel on that item, unless there's anyone in the audience that feels the need. So I'll move on to then item 3, 5.3 on the panel's agenda. Item 3 is a minor variation to the Natai Ponds Voluntary Planning Agreement. The council officer's recommendation is that the minor variation be supported with street trees and landscaping be provided to enhance and beautify Beresford Street in lieu of wider road pavement, and that the minor variation does not require public notification given minor and immaterial nature of the variation, noting prior exhibition of the VPA, and further noting the DA underwent exhibition at that time. I have no one on my list to address the panel on that item. Next item, moving on to the development applications. Item 6.1 is a development application for temporary use of land, brackets annual market event at 2 to 4 Marketplace, Berrima. The council officer's recommendation is that the development application be approved subject to conditions. I have no one on my list to address the panel on that item. Item 6.2, development application for food and drink premises, brackets cafe and associated fit out and signage at Shop 1/55 Renwick Drive, Renwick. The council officer's recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. Is there anyone in the audience wish to address the panel on that item? Sorry, I think I may have you on my list. No, I don't. But, oh, yes, I do. Sorry, I do. I beg your pardon. Mr. Pepping.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, my name's Mark Pepping. I'm the applicant for this application on behalf of the lessee from that's got the lease with council. Look, I'm not going to take up any of your time. We support the recommendation by the staff and see this as a great opportunity for the residents of Renwick to indulge in a relaxed atmosphere that the facility provides. And any questions I'm happy to take.
Questions of Mr. Pepping?
Yes, can I just ask, we visited the site and we did kind of discuss it, and we weren't certain on music and if that's intended didn't seem like the application was totally clear about if that is an intended use or if, although some signage I think includes it as a music cafe. So we just wanted a bit more information around that kind of ancillary or whatever, if it is part of it, so we can kind of gauge it. I think the report does mention that there are some conditions, noise
Yes,
conditions
I-
around it, but we weren't sure of the specifics.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can give us some more information on that.
Yes, I don't believe that there's any intention for any live music. I mean, obviously being a restaurant cafe, there'll probably be background music. And there is a recreation area to the side, and if there was to be something out of, like a musician or something like that, then it would be something that would have to be applied to council as the owner of the land for a special occasion, but generally no, not any live music.
Thanks for that.
Then just following up, the sign does actually say music. So why would you have music on your sign if there's no, like, targeted music or bands or so on?
Well, there'll be music played in the environment, as a lot of restaurants and cafes do have music. I don't believe that live music was the intention of having that, but I can check with the applicant. That was never mentioned to me as a component of this particular application.
The existing operation there, how does that relate to now what is proposed?
So the council entered a lease with the current lessee, I think it was in December of 2022, as a pop-up cafe. He has a 5-year lease, and so this fit out is part of the conditions of that lease, that he makes good the actual facility. So it's still in its pop-up phase. I don't think anyone anticipated that it would take this long to get the approval through.
Right, okay, all right. So in other words, that's why it refers to first use in the...
Correct. There's a condition under the lease that they are required to submit a development application to council for the permanent use of the facility, yes. So if the current lessee doesn't continue in that 5-year period, then it's already established as a cafe for someone to take on. And that was the intention of being in the community centre that, it was built by the state government, Landcom, Landcom I think it was, handed over to council, but it was part of a combined facility. And speaking about music, I mean, the community centre will have music, obviously, for functions and that as well. So that site will generate live music on occasions.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about car parking? The council officer report indicates there's sufficient parking available for this use. It's not clear whether what the rest of the community facility generates in terms of car parking. Is that something you've had a look at?
Car parking is an issue, but well, I'm not saying for this particular site. I know community centres have sparked and on occasions parking issues because of its location, and it's within the centre of Renwick. It's unlikely that this particular use would generate a lot of external patrons coming into that premises. I mean, it's there. It's a local cafe. It'll mostly be used by residents of Renwick walking there with their kids on bikes or dogs or whatever. So, and again, in the planning phase, the floor space of the community centre and the anticipated use as a cafe were calculated from a parking perspective. I think from memory, I don't have it in front of me, I think it's about 42 or 52 spaces there. But as I said, I think a lot of the users of that facility will be walkers or riders to the facility.
And if you had a chance to have a look at the recommended conditions
Yes,
of consent,
yes.
is there anything you wish to
No,
say
there's
to us?
nothing that of any concern.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's the next item. on the panel's agenda is development application for outdoor digital display wall sign for community events at 16 to 24 Ben Dooley Street, Bowral. Council officer's recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. I have no one on my list to address the panel on that item. That being the last item on the agenda, I'll now close the public part of this meeting for the panel to adjourn in private to discuss our findings. The panel will then reconvene in public to read our recommendations onto the record, and as I said, the minutes will be published on the council officer's website by close of business tomorrow afternoon. So I'll now formally close the public part of this meeting.